Welcome back. We're discussing the situation in the military camps holding hundreds of thousands of Tamils in Sri Lanka and the chances for reconciliation between the Tamil minority and Sinhalese majority in the post-war era. For our discussion, we have Mahinda Gunasekara, the president of the Sri Lanka United National Association of Canada, who joins us from Toronto, and here in Washington, D.C. is Bruce Fine, the legal counsel for the advocacy group Tamils for Justice. Let's get back to questions with a caller from Norway. Birabu, what would you like to ask?
The question is, Mr. Bruce, actually now we have to depend on the international committee. The United Nations should discuss this matter in the Security Council, these empty promises, and we are sick and tired of these empty promises and secret killings and torturing and rapes going on. So now we are asking you, as well as the international committee, do something
Birabu, let me ask Mr. Fine, what impact has your effort, to engage the United Nations to get some kind of action done at an international level been?
Well, I have approached the United States. The United Nations is not a propitious forum because China sits, and Russia as well, on the Security Council with unilateral veto power. And they simply don't want any investigation because they have their own groups in a similar situation. China's got the Tibetans and the Uyghurs, Russia has Chechnya, and so that's not a promising forum. The United States, I have gotten to look at the genocide indictment. The United States did abstain from the recent IMF loan for $2.5 billion, been critical of President Mahinda Rajapaksa and Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the defense minister. But it's very difficult in part because absent military intervention, if China is willing to bail Sri Lanka out of all of its economic travails, what other efforts are available to push something that will cause a change in the government's behavior?
Raj in the UK, what's your question? What would you like to ask?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to thank Mr. Fine for his work he has done recently in Tamil Nadu, in Chennai, in India. I'm an Indian origin myself, and to be honest with you, this is an eye-opener in what's happening in Sri Lanka. Mr. Fine, what is the way for this problem? I mean, it seems that there's so much going on behind the scenes, and how can you help people?
What's the most realistic way forward?
Well, there has to be. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. One of the problems has been the government has placed basically a blackout, a media blackout. They let a little human aid to come in, humanitarian aid, but the human rights groups aren't there. And again, I don't want to be Pollyannish and suggest that there's a whole lot that can be done absent military force. And it's unfortunate that Sri Lanka has not oil, it's got not nuclear weapons, and absent that, it's hard to generate a consensus, especially when you have China and Russia willing to defend it, to accomplish much of anything other than just speak out and hope that even indictments that can't be effectuated because you don't have extradition will at least send a message that this is not acceptable behavior. Other than that, there may be things inside Sri Lanka that would push the Rajapaksas out of power that could change the dynamic, but until that happens, I'm not optimistic.
Well, Mr. Gunasekara, let me ask you basically to respond to this idea that the government hasn't been willing to let in the international community at the level of human rights investigators and journalists to come in and report the story. What can be done to try to open up access?
United Nations officials have visited all these camps. They have come and had discussions with the government. There are the relief agencies already on site. There is CARE, Red Cross, several Oxfam, several of these relief agencies are already there. There are also local NGOs working there. And they know what is happening. We don't. And
well, sir, let me put it in the form of a question that's come from our live station chat room, which comes from Marston in Massachusetts, and he asks or says, UNHCR policy favors closing refugee camps to restore the communities that existed before. How is the government specifically handling resettlement, sir?
Right now, they are giving priority to demining the villages. Meanwhile, the IDPs are being provided with all what they need. There are 232 doctors looking after their health. There are schools that are being established in these camps where 40,000 children who had no access to schools are now going to school. Those who surrendered, admitting that they were former LTT fighters, have been separated and they are being rehabilitated. They are being given vocational training so that they'll be able to resume their lives.
Isn't there?
So there are many measures.
Mr. Gunasekara, isn't there an issue?
Many measures being taken. Yeah.
Yeah, sir. Isn't there a major issue in the fact that the Sri Lankan government doesn't take any Tamils into its military forces, into any kind of security environment? The level of integration is almost non-existent at a level where perhaps there could be far more impact. And this in itself will only. I mean, you yourself said that many of the civilians are seen as potential fighters. So surely the level of suspicion has to be changed.
Right now there are changes taking place. There are several batches of Tamils who have been trained as police officers. There was one batch that passed out in the eastern province, a batch of 250 Tamil policemen. Another batch is being trained. So as time goes on, before long, places will be open to the Tamil community to participate fully.
Okay, I'm going to get to Bruce Fine in here again. Actually, we had a chat room comment from Andy in New York City who says, will the UN send peacekeepers to Sri Lanka? I think we've established it's probably not going to be a UN...
Well, then the Sri Lanka has made it clear they wouldn't let any peacekeepers in, that they want everybody out. In fact, when the British and the French foreign ministers were visiting at the last hours of the civil conflict, the President, Mahinda, said, hey, this is just an internal matter. Stay out. It's just up for us to decide. And I think that's the same intransigence you'll encounter today, if not even greater.
We had a comment from a Facebook, sir, that came in from Rizvi Juaidin, who says there was no war. There was no war between the majority Sinhalese and minority Tamils. It was the war between the government and brutal terrorist organization called LTTE. But the Western media always tries to describe it as a war between two ethnic groups. I wonder how much of an issue was it that the Tamil Tigers largely eliminated any kind of political arm and became largely seen as a fighting force only, and also very much focused around the sort of charismatic figure of Velupillai Prabhakaran.
Well, remember, the Tamil Tigers didn't come upon the scene till decades after peaceful Gandhi-like protest against the subjugation of the Tamils was fruitless. In fact, you may recall there's something called Black July of 1983. This is after the Jaffna Library had been burned and there'd been periodic riots. This was a situation where the government itself had organized race riots. 3,000 to 4,000 died, tens of thousands of businesses, homes had destroyed, and the president at that time said, when all of this horror was brought to his attention, my concern is only to keep the Sinhalese happy. It's not to do anything about the Tamils. So the Tamil Tigers emerged when political efforts were illegal. The government of Sri Lanka made it a crime to even advocate the idea of a separate autonomous Tamil state, so that all political operations became criminal. Then you get forced into that kind of conflict.
Let's see if we can get in Jay from London with a quick question or comment. Go ahead, Jay.
Hi, Mr. Gunasekara. I would just like to ask you, if you are doing so many things for the Tamil community, why has the world media been banned from these areas to find out for themselves?
Okay, very quick answer, sir. Mr. Gunasekara, why isn't the media allowed in at all?
The media is already there. There are several media people who have visited those camps. And what is the special need for the media? What is needed are the humanitarian agencies to provide the relief that is needed.
Okay. Well,
and
so
also I'd like to respond to Mr. Bruce Feen. Yeah, what I was going to say is that the Tamil minority, they were a privileged community under the British, and they wanted to retain their dominating position even after independence without cooperating with the majority, and that is why there were differences of opinion whenever any measures were taken to balance things out. They considered it as discrimination, whereas all along this 11% minority dominated the life of the country.
Well, I want to thank you, and thank you both for being with us, and thank you for your questions. On the next show, Iran's President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad will be sworn into a second term on Wednesday, but will this bring to an end the street protests and claims of election fraud in Iran? Join us for that. We'll see you next time.